The Misfits of Real Estate. You've got your two best misfits here. My co-host Matt Druin. We're
What's up?
waiting for our friend Jeff to join. So we're gonna just wrap a little bit until he gets on. How are things going, Matt? Matt's got a Bigger Pockets episode coming out where he was guest. So that's pretty awesome. When does that drop?
That actually dropped yesterday. It was on the Bigger Pockets Rookie podcast. It is the story of how one of my tenants that didn't pay in 2 years posted my house for sale on Craigslist for like $45,000. By the way, this property was worth like over $150,000 and was scamming people out of like cash deposits. Like, so he was like, hey, I know you're interested in the house. Like, give me $500 bucks cash, and then like my attorney will send over paperwork to you and that sort of thing. And they would just just ghost the people. So it was my horror story associated with that, and the tactical type of things that owner operators can do to respond to those situations when they do happen, and then also preparatory things that we use in terms of tenant screening. Rigorous tenant screening, and so on and so forth. So no, it was a lot of fun. It's always fun to talk about war stories after you've already gone through them.
Yeah. I think we had to eventually start watermarking all of our images with like our name and phone number in a pretty prominent spot where they couldn't get cropped out, because we had a lot of people that would grab our listings and both try to sell them and try to lease them, and just all kinds of scams running.
Yeah, this one was particularly sinister because this wasn't one of those ones where they grab pictures off of Zillow or Trulia or something like that and then like post it on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Like, this was actually a tenant that was living in the house, took pictures of the house, put it on Craigslist, was actually touring people through the property, like groups of people, trying to scam them, right? So super convincing, to somebody that's just coming up off the street.
Yeah.
So kind of unavoidable.
Hey,
yeah.
If it's too good to be true, it is. You know what I mean? Like, anybody should have been able to see through that $50,000 for a $150,000 house. I mean, I hate when people get scammed, but that level of fraud is just like, come on, use common sense. Things can't be that good.
Well,
that would be my take.
The kicker of the whole thing was that I tried setting up a sting operation after I found out about this, right? And the only way I found out about this was, it was like on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. I got a phone call like at like 10:30 at night when I was like turning down for bed from another investor. His name was Matt, and he was like, hey, do you own the property at 123 Main Street? I'm not going to share the specifics because I want to protect the name, protect the guilty, right? And I was like, yeah, I do. Why are you calling? And he's like, I just walked through your house, and this guy is collecting like cash deposits from people.
Wow.
So the sad part of it was it wasn't even the tenant that I rented to. It was the son of the mother who I rented to, who was a really, really sweet lady. I was actually going to sell the house to her because after I rented the house to her, she approached me and was like, I'd really, nobody in my family has ever owned a home before. I'm not in a position right now to buy something, but would you be open to selling it to me if I could, get the financing and that sort of thing? I was like, yeah, sure. Absolutely. I connected her with NACA, Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, which is like a no down payment program that is designed for moderate to low income people and that sort of thing. And so, and come to find out, she passed away, and so her sons were living there, and one of them was not a do-gooder, and it was doing all types of scams out of this house. So I got it on the news, because it was such an insane story. And then also I tried setting up a sting operation with my property manager. I did it
Nice.
like on Facebook Live, and before the news story hit the TV, and the guy ghosted us. And I was like, oh man, I think literally, dude, we were like, I was like coming up there with like my phone like this, like Facebook Live, because I just want to get this guy in the act.
Mhm.
And then in the event that he shot me, I'd have like, this like story that would yeah. This is what happens when you get pissed, right? You do irrational things.
Yeah.
And so he ghosted us, and I texted him. I was like, "Hey man, like I'm sorry, maybe we got our wires crossed, blah 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 blah." So he texted me back. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I spaced, and I forgot about our appointment. Can you come back on Friday?" I was like, "Let me get back to you." And he's like, and then my property manager was like, "Dude, this guy's just gonna ghost you again, so like don't even bother." So I just texted him back. I was like, "Hey man, sorry, we're no longer interested." So 24 hours goes by, and he texts me again, and he's like, "Hey, oh, by the way, in case you're still interested, I dropped the price to $15,000."
15,000?
Yeah, for $150,000 house. So the news the news that was, God, it was like Rochester First or something like that, or Spectrum News aired the story. The next day, I got a call from Greece police, and from it was like an unknown number, right? So I picked it up, and it's like, "Hey, it's Greece police officer so and so," and I was like, "Thank God." I was like we're gonna get this guy, right? And I was like, "Oh, are you calling about that news story?" He's like, "No, I don't know what you're talking about, but um, we picked up a kid. We arrested a kid who was trying to buy a pack of gum from the 7-Eleven down the street from this house with counterfeit
Mhm.
money." That he got from selling an Xbox to the tenant at your house. So I was like, dude, this guy's scamming people out of thousands of dollars in cash, selling a property he doesn't own. He's buying stuff with counterfeit money, like out of this house. So this house is like the grounds of like a criminal operation, right? There's no possible way that this tenant could possibly be living there. It's like the whole sort of thing, like, don't crap where you eat type of thing. And so I just kind of put my game theory hat on, and I was like, there's no possible way this guy could be living there. So I just my property manager wouldn't even do this, but I called my contractor. I just told him to change the locks at the property. We put in a surveillance system. We put signs all over the property, like no trespassing, property under video surveillance. And we just waited for a phone call, like from a tenant, like, "Oh, we got locked out," or, tripping the security system and that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
30 days went by, and nobody came back. So we basically just cleared out the house. I painted it, I put it on the market, and I sold it.
Nice. That's a nuts. That story's nuts.
It's
It
only
looks
one.
like
I got many more.
well, we might have to break into him because it looks like Jeff is canceling because of his travels. I guess his flight was changed or something.
Okay.
So
Well, maybe we can
we'll have
talk.
to get him back on.
Maybe we can talk about landlord horror stories today.
Oh God. Hopefully I don't say anything I shouldn't say. Don't get me started.
Just all of the names, times, events are fictitious to protect the name of the innocent. So you can you can share some. And what is the statute of limitations? Like 7 years or something?
Yeah. I had one call from a neighbor where these younger tenants were having a raging house party and they threw somebody through a Victorian window that had like two panes. It had the storm window, had the regular window, and literally just like threw the person completely through it, and then hit somebody over the head with Jack Daniel's bottle. And there was just like blood everywhere. And my neighbor was like, "You should probably come over and see this." I was like, "Should I?"
Uh-huh.
So those were my last MCC tenants ever. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's I don't any lawyers that are checking in here that are versed on fair housing and that sort of thing. Can you discriminate based upon where they go to school? Not the fact that they're a student, but where they go to school. Or we don't rent to underclassmen, only upperclassmen
Right.
or graduate students. But I'll tell you one thing. I mean, graduate students were like my favorite, because I'd get like PhD candidates from U of R. They would be in my apartments for like 7 years. It was amazing. Um, and they never partied or anything like that because they were studying and writing all the time. But yeah, like those like undergraduate RIT students were like the worst. They're the absolute worst. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. I was one of them. I was actually a pretty good tenant though. I like refinished my landlord's hardwood floors by myself, rented the machine, stained them. We repainted everything. Of course, the colors that we painted probably in hindsight were not what I would want as a landlord, but he still let us do it anyway. We lived with an avocado green fridge with no seal around the door, thinking that it was just normal. That like, oh yeah, I guess the landlord can't afford a new fridge. Yeah. What did we know?
Well, that's the joys of like student housing is like they, the students have very low standards, but at the same time, they have very low standards.
Yeah. And not a lot of knowledge on how to like care for a property. I mean, we mowed when we had to mow. I don't think we really raked. There were a ton of trees. We lived next to a forest. Like we were not raking that. No, it's not happening.
Did you live near the river?
No, I lived on a little street in Brighton that backed up to a small park. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's right over there by South Clinton and Highland.
Okay.
Cimarron Park, maybe it's called.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Cimarron, that's like a strong hospital neighborhood or something like that, right?
I might be. It might be a different park.
Are you thinking about Persimmon Park?
Maybe. It's right by Highland and South Clinton. It's that corner.
Okay. Was it Eldridge? Was that the name of the street?
Howland.
Howland. Oh, okay. Okay, got it. But yeah, anyways, why did you start a property management like company? Because property management is like the worst thing. It's like the worst. It's the worst job in the entire world.
Yeah. So I was at ITT Corp, got laid off. I had, probably a dozen properties when I got laid off. There were no jobs for imaging scientists because everybody, Kodak, Xerox, all imaging scientists, all laid off looking for work. My wife didn't want to move. And that's when I got licensed as a broker. I was really good on the sales side of things. And I started to teach other people how to be an agent. And I didn't have time to self-manage. And plus I had clients that were buying investment properties and they needed management services. And when I looked into the legality, obviously, I'd have to be a broker. I'd have to have my own company, et cetera, to manage for other people. But really the catalyst was not trusting somebody else early on when I had these 12 units and I was trying to figure out, who could I hire to do this because it was taking away too much of my time and I couldn't focus on my other businesses. So we decided to do it in-house and then just grew it organically, starting with just like my few units and then like maybe 2 or 3 of my clients that only had 1 or 2 units. So it was kind of like a side project just to make sure that I knew what was going on with my properties and I could keep them in good shape and not risk a bad tenant like destroying them.
So your idea was like, okay, well, with these certain amount of units, I don't have like the economies of scale to hire like an employees and that sort of thing. So if I take on third-party management with my clients, then I can build to the economies of scale to not only grow my portfolio and put those units under my management company's responsibility, but also with my clients as well.
Yeah. So, I definitely subsidized the company until I got to enough units to be able to carry payroll. And I started small, but the whole concept was like my time was more valuable doing something else. So if I was answering tenant calls and showing tenants units, it was just a waste of my time. So I did have to hire somebody early on, and the management fees collected did not offset that expense for that employee. I had them helping me do other stuff as well. So I kind of justified it in my own mind. Like if they had downtime, they weren't just like twiddling their thumbs. I was taught them how to, help me with contracts and help me with doing admin stuff. So I kept them busy, but I would tell you that there's definitely a level of subsidy until you hit a critical mass of units where you can just say, okay, I've got enough income coming in that I can have the right people, the right personnel that can do the job.
So what was that critical mass, Mark? Like when you were like, okay, I'm no longer having to take my like brokerage income to subsidize this company. Like what was that sort of magic number?
I think you want to have like 150 units under management in our marketplace, at least, the units that I was managing, which were probably a little bit on the higher end, higher than average. We'll say most investors are buying below average. I always was trying to do average or above average. So my rents are, a little bit higher. So if you're doing lower rent stuff, then maybe you need a few more units. And if you're doing higher, you need a few less. But 150 seemed to be about that spot where I could stop throwing cash into a burning fire.
Yeah, I mean, general, my background's in like large scale property management for, multifamily, and, general rule of thumb was like, for every 100 units, you wanted to have like a admin person. And then for every, 75 units or so, you'd want to have like some type of maintenance person. The first property I got thrown on, which was a good place to learn, was a 720 unit property. So there was like, the maintenance staff was like around like, including seasonal people, was like 15 to 16 people at any given point in time. So it was like a huge property, but allowed me to like understand like division of labor and responsibilities with building larger teams and that sort of thing. So I'd really like to get like into that type of deal space in the future, because what I own now is like, a lot of small multifamily, some medium-sized multifamily, like let's say like 20 to 30 unit buildings, but I really want to get into like the 150 plus unit space, because then you can bring so much more in-house, and you don't have like you have an on-site maintenance shop, an on-site leasing office. So you don't have people that are like, running around all over town, or guys having to run to Home Depot 3 times a day to get, to spend 2 hours to buy line sets, sipping coffee, chatting with their buddies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. They also pay less too, though, right? Typical management on a larger is what, 5-6%, sometimes a little bit lower.
Yeah, 5%. I think it was like between 4 and 5% when I was working for this larger company. But they build back everything. So that 4 to 5% was essentially like, the gross profit to the management company. And then out of that would get paid, salaries for like the actual corporate office and that sort of thing. And then
So what was do you know what the actual cost was after all the billbacks and all that stuff, or not really?
General administrative like is usually going to run around like 8 to 10%. Most property management companies, you see like the smaller like multi-site management companies that charge 10%. A lot of that stuff is included. So
why don't you break down the stuff that would be billed back, that would be different in that large scale case? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Like bookkeeping and administrative types of functions at the property. Payroll, right? So payroll for your leasing and management staff, that was an additional line item. Okay. And your supervisory type of stuff with the with the maintenance staff that were overseeing multiple properties, because we had some shared staff between properties across the portfolio. This was the Farish portfolio. So all of that stuff is like billed back. I mean, like with you are not like billing back like your at least I'm assuming like like your time you spend like allocated to a property, or one of your management people, like that's why the management fee is paid. So by having a higher management fee, you're not billing back as much of that stuff because it's included in the management fee typically.
So it seems like it's just kind of marketing. Maybe I should lower my rate and just bill everything back. What do you think they're actually making on the larger scale? Do you think they're making the same 10%, more, less?
I mean, I think probably there's for the, like, let's say 4 to 5% is like is essentially the gross profit that gets paid to the corporate office, right? And so the corporate office, like support staff, like let's say the regional property managers and the bookkeeping and staff accounting staff and stuff like that, that probably makes up about 30% of that. All right. So, and then the rest of it is basically just like the, net operating profit that, that gets distributed to the owners, right? Or kept as retained earnings.
Okay. So these guys are basically anything they have on payroll, they're just going to divide by how many units. And then, let's say the portfolio is 1,000 units and one customer has 500 of the units. They're getting basically billed for half of all their payroll.
I don't know that at that much of a granular level, but I just know like when and this is when I look at pro formas for larger properties too, is that there's a lot of line, I divide the property management fees collected on the trailing 12 based on the income to see like what type of property management fees are getting billed. And they're usually between 4 and 5%, depending upon the size of the property. And then there's all this like, what is it? SG&A, selling general administrative type of stuff that's billed on top of that.
Gotcha.
So in our company, because we only manage in house, we don't do third party management, but we bill back the the SG&A on a per unit basis, really. Essentially, I mean, we're managing the properties that we own, but we want to be able to, like, when we turn our books in at the end of the year,
right,
for tax filings, that sort of thing, we need to allocate, it to the properties effectively.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, we'll have to get a guest on that really specializes in this and really dig in. Because I'm in the same boat. I think I would like to take on some larger units under management.
Yeah, in our market, at least, it's a tough nut to crack into, because like you have the third party management companies that do those ones, like they have a majority of the market share. So, and then a lot of other people in town, like, they self-manage, like, let's say like, Morgan management self-manages everything. Galena and Buckingham, they all self-manage, and they control a lot of the market share too. So, somebody on here just messaged through Facebook. Yes, Jeff did have to reschedule. He thought he could swing it because I guess he was in the Atlanta airport or something like that. So
yeah.
But yeah. I know that there was a lot of people. I mean, I guess we can talk about mobile home parks. Or don't.
We're not going to do it justice, no.
Yeah. So, but it is an intriguing asset class. I never owned any mobile home parks myself. Is why I was excited to have Jeff on, just because, I mean, he's the largest mobile home park operator in New York State. I believe still. I mean, that was the case a few years ago.
Yeah.
I actually did mobile home park management as part of my management portfolio when I worked for the national development company. So familiar with the business model. It's the one book that I read that was really impactful to me understanding the mobile park business was Jim Clayton's book. Jim Clayton started Clayton Homes, which was not only a mobile home park operator, but also a manufacturer of homes. And that was an awesome book, just to help me like even understand like the history of the mobile home park business, because the way it started back, let's say, I don't remember, but like in the middle of the 20th century, like in the 1950s or so, it was a resident home owned model that they paid lot rent. And mobile home parks were actually a desirable option for naturally occurring affordable housing. And then things change. I think it probably what helped or hurt it was the FHA with their programs in terms of like massively subsidizing the building of new homes out in the suburbs. What we know is suburban sprawl. And so a lot of these people that didn't want to live in highly, densely populated urban areas, and and they found mobile home parks as a alternative to that. Now found, okay, well, we can buy a Sears built home for $25,000 and also get FHA financing on it at a really low rate, because banks really weren't lending in the real estate space. Back in the day, you'd have to like put 50% down in order to buy a house before the government stepped in and spun off the organizations like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That's where we got 30-year mortgages with let's say 3 to 5% down. So
right, yeah.
So it evolved into a park-owned home model, and the unfortunate thing is a lot of banks have not really like gotten with the times to offer the credit facilities to finance mobile home park purchases and bring in new homes for vacant pads and that sort of thing. And so and that's changing, I believe. I think that FHA is actually starting to lend on actual mobile homes now. So we'll see if there's like a systemic or tectonic shift in the marketplace. But yeah, I mean, we brought in new homes to these parks that I operated in Michigan, and we basically brought in new homes, tied them down, set them up. We partnered with 21st Mortgage, which is a large company that offers financing for mobile homes, where they'd bring in the homes for free essentially, and we'd have 1 year to sell them. Okay. And I got to tell you, is like, we sent these people to 21st Mortgage to get, pre-qualified, and nobody was credit worthy. Nobody had the income to buy them. And so these things would sit vacant for a year, and then we'd have to end up, buying them and financing them through 21st Mortgage. And then rent them out. Yeah. But that's like a little brief history.
I met a gentleman when I was in Phoenix for the Raise Fest he's got a pretty good model he's been doing for the last year. He comes from like a wholesaling background, just like crushing wholesale deals. And over 2023, I think he told me he did like 12 of these, or maybe even more, maybe like 20. But he will find a parcel. He'll pay up to, this is in like the Phoenix area or outside of Phoenix, pay up to $50,000 for the land, go in. They got a dealership license, so they could get these manufactured homes at a pretty good discount to what you and I would pay. They slap it up. They put in the well. They skirt it, and then they sell it. And he said he's not doing it unless he makes $100,000 per property. So I think they must have figured out the financing, because these guys they're moving it. They're moving the product pretty quick. It's like they're not sitting on the market. They go pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's also going to depend largely upon the market, right? So we had properties like, okay, an example market, for instance, one of these properties was in Flint, Michigan. Okay, you think Detroit is a depressed area? Like Flint, Michigan is like it's the economics there are pretty awful. And so those are the types of markets we were trying to sell something that was like, let's say, this was back in 2016. They were like, $50,000, $50,000 for a single wide 3-bed, 2 full bath home. And it's just the financing was difficult on it. So the opportunity for mobile home park buyers out there is that because banks are so hesitant to lend on parks that have a predominantly high amount of park-owned homes, owner financing is like ubiquitous among the mobile home park transaction space. And as you know, like with seller financing, for instance, you can really customize some pretty killer deals that are win-win situations for both parties. Right. So it's definitely a good business model. I'd be interested in it probably in a different market. Our weather, like up in the Northeast, kicks the crap out of these houses. But you'll go down to, like, let's say Florida or parts of Arizona, and you'll see these properties that, like, they'll have, these people will have like 1960s Redman tin cans. Redman's is one of the manufacturers, and they look like a cream puff. Like they're like freshly painted. They have like, this like, sort of like tropical landscaping around them. Like they look really, really nice. So you mentioned skirting though. That was one of my jobs when I, visited these properties once a month as I drive around with the property manager, and we would do what's called a skirting audit.
Okay. Looking for the ones that
And
were busted up.
yeah, with jacked up skirting, in the words of my property managers. So yeah, we issue the residents notices, and a lot of these people just didn't have the money to like buy new skirting. So we would actually like have a certain, I instituted this. We had a certain amount of budget every year where we would just buy a ton of skirting at a wholesale, and we would just basically give it away to the residents to reskirt their homes. Because the thing is that you'll drive through some of these parks, and they would like you drive through some of these parks, and like it makes the curb appeal so crappy when you see homes that don't have skirting, missing skirting, old aluminum skirting that is all like bent and twisted and that sort of thing. Yeah, we also had, I instituted some curb appeal contests where we'd like give away like free turkeys and that sort of thing for like residents to like rent the pressure washer from the maintenance office and pressure wash their houses or paint their houses and stuff like that. So those are just the example of the properties that I was responsible for, which were not in the most like advantageous areas to invest in, but no, I mean, it's like it was definitely important to retain the good residents and attract good residents as well.
Yeah.
So, have you ever bought a mobile home as an investment property, Mark?
I have not. I sold a few for an individual. One of them was on the lake, on Lake Canisius, which was pretty cool. And we had a really hard time getting it financed. We almost thought that it would have to be a cash deal. And then we found one lender down in the southern tier that would do it. And it was simply because the age of the trailer. I think this particular trailer was like maybe mid 70s or something. And most of the lenders that I had called to try to get people financed through had a cutoff of like the 80s.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that we talked about this with Larry on our show before, that it's probably the one of the big tools in the tool belt to solve the affordable housing crisis is manufactured homes. Because I mean, my wife and I are out there looking to potentially build a house, and the pricing is like 300, in the 300 bucks per square foot range to build a new home right now. Like not anything that's like super fancy or anything like that either. Right. So it's definitely like, I don't know how we're going to move the needle otherwise.
Right. There's no way. Modular and manufactured.
This is my idea. You want to hear my idea?
Yeah.
My idea is, the government, when they recognize the affordable housing crisis after World War II, the baby boom generation, that sort of thing, they rolled out these programs like FHA that led to suburban sprawl and that sort of thing. I mean, I think that to really make a dent on this, I think one of the ways the federal government can get involved is to subsidize financing for the building of new owner-occupant homes, or even multifamily for rent, but starting with owner-occupant, where if you can go in and get a 50-year amortization with a 2.5% interest rate if you build a home. I think that the financing piece, I think, is the tail that can wag the dog on this. I don't think that there's going to be any way that the invisible hand of the market is going to actually be able to solve this issue, at least at the rate that we need it solved.
Right. So what do you want to talk about? So we don't have Jeff here to interrogate.
Well, one thing I want to talk about today is, oh yeah, we forgot to make the announcement, is next Thursday at 5:30, doors open. Freedom First Real Estate Investors Association, which Mark and I are both on the leadership team for. We're having a generational wealth panel next Thursday evening at Eagle Vale Golf Club. So we're gonna have a panel of real estate investors that have used some really unique strategies and tactics to help give their children and children's children a leg up. One of the things that I think that there's sort of phases of generational wealth. The generational wealth that my parents passed upon me was putting my brother and I in a good school district, teaching us the values, the work ethic, putting it, really instilling like that, sort of, go to school, go to college, so you can be better off than we were living paycheck to paycheck. And so I think, kind of like view myself in terms of my responsibility is like, all right, well, what can I do to make sure my children are starting off better ahead of where I am, at least in the struggle factor. But there's sort of a balance. And I want to get your take on this, Mark, is, what is, how much is too much? Like, how do you moderate that with your kids so they don't like become like, spoiled brats or become like, like drug addicts or something like that? Like, what do you specifically do with your kids to like, in terms of your whole, like you and your wife's generational wealth strategy?
Yeah, the kids are still pretty young, but instilling like that the entrepreneurial spirit in them early on. I think that helped me watching my father build his business. You want to give them enough to get ahead, but you don't want to give them so much that they become complacent. I don't know where I got that. That was a quote from somebody at one point, but I can't give credit to it. But that's kind of
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, right. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. So, when I remember going to the grocery store and be like, I want this toy or I want this candy, and the answer was just no, we can't afford it. And so I'm trying to have that same mentality when my kids are whining at me for a toy or for something like that. And then the same thing with like, dinners out or something like that. We try to make it like a very special occasion and not something that they just assume that like, we can just afford to go out to eat whenever we want. No, it's, we're going to cook our food. We're going to be very deliberate with how we spend our money and make sure that they hopefully get a sense of appreciation for those types of activities.
That's interesting in terms of like instilling the entrepreneurial spirit. Like, I mean, besides the money making part of things, like why else is that important?
That's a good question. I think ultimately, so you can control your own destiny. If I think about myself, and I'm much happier working for myself than I could ever be working for somebody else. I think I innately knew that about myself forever. But like you said, your parents are go to school, go to college, get a job. They've got this fear that, maybe the kids shouldn't be entrepreneurs. They should just be a doctor or, be whatever, but have like a career path that's very understood instead of being like, oh, I'm going to be a real estate entrepreneur. Like, what does that even mean? Like, there's so many different avenues in real estate and it's risky, et cetera. So it's tough balance because I feel the same pull where, I want my kids to go to school. I want them to go to college, but I also don't want them to think that they can't be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, like one thing is I definitely want to talk about the college thing, because that's kind of come under fire, especially with a lot of like Gen Zs and millennials. But also, I mean, I think that on the entrepreneurial thing is like really like, I think entrepreneur is, I hate that word because it's been overused. It's kind of like, oh, it sounds French and it sounds fancy and that sort of thing. And entrepreneur has sort of like become like the new black, right? Um,
Mhm.
and I really think at its core is problem solving is a huge part of entrepreneurship. Um, and I think that at least with me, my entrepreneurial journey, like quote unquote, started out of like basically like I needed stuff. I wanted stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't get it. So how can I get it?
Yeah.
What types of what types of problems can can I solve in order to do that, and how resourceful can I be? And I think that that sort of thing of like you know teaching your kid like how to make their own money
Mm-hmm.
is that involves a lot of resourcefulness, right? And I think that like young people will think a lot more, because this is also like an impressionable time in their life too. I think that they'll think a lot more resourcefully than, let's say, even you or I can. Um,
Yeah.
just because their brains aren't formed yet, right? Like we have like at this point in time, I'm 40 years old, and the synapses are firing in a certain way, right? So it's like I try to like just I just use my past experience and amalgamate sort of solutions to problems, where I think young people can kind of think outside the box and think more resourcefully. Because I think there's people that are cousins of mine that are young, that are younger, that I mean, like they have like side hustles that are just like it's like a well, actually, my brother's younger than I am. He loves records, right? Vinyl records. And so he wanted to find a way to, one, make extra money, but also doing something that he really was passionate about, and also to fuel his own record, like audiophile type of hobby, right? So
Yeah.
he would go to estate sales and like buy entire collections of records, for like cheap and that sort of thing. And he'd like basically he'd be able to pull out right away like which ones had good street value to them, and then he would run a Facebook Live auction, and he'd have like thousands of people that would tune into this and like bid on these records. And he made like around like $500 a week doing that.
That's awesome.
So I think that that's part of the other thing in terms of like, hey, like how can I help you be a better problem solver? Because I think that we talk about artificial intelligence a lot, Mark, Mark and I, and I think that the way that people are going to be able to harness the power of artificial intelligence and also get ahead of the curve is through that problem solving. Because I think the human brain can work in terms of thinking of those things in an entrepreneurial sense better than at least artificial intelligence can at this point in time. But
Yeah.
on the college thing, I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm definitely not going to force my daughter and son to go to college. Like that's there. There's no other option than that, because that's the way it was for me and my brother. My parents and our lineage never went to college, right? So that was like the one
Mm-hmm.
thing that was like a crowning achievement for my parents, was to put us on the track for that.
Right.
I think that college definitely didn't teach me a lot that I use today, but it taught me how to learn. Um, and I think that was incredibly important. To
Yeah.
also, have to manage your own schedule too, because that was the hardest thing about college for me. It was like, it wasn't like, as regimented as public school was, like, K through 12. Um,
Yeah.
so I still think there's value in it, but I definitely don't want them to get in
Yeah.
debt to pay for it.
If you can use college to find what you love and what you're passionate about, I think it's great. But I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff that I learned that I'm not using. But like one of my first entrepreneurial activities, like post leaving home and going to college and like, trying to figure out if I was getting in the real world or what was happening. So I had taken a flame working class at RIT as an elective, which really was outside of my studies. I'm a scientist by trade. And I just got bit by the bug. I really love doing it as like a creative outlet. And it's a really expensive hobby, right? You've got to have a torch. You've got to have all the materials. You've got to have a kiln. You've got to have a studio. And so to offset the costs of all those things, I just decided that I would, manufacture pendants for necklaces and jewelry, earrings, stuff like that, and then
Mm-hmm.
sell it as a side hustle to kind of pay for my hobby. And that was kind of one of the like light bulbs probably early on that I didn't really give a lot of credit to,
Mm-hmm.
was, finding something that I was passionate about, but then making sure that I wasn't just, spending a ton of money on it. I was actually monetizing it, being able to do it and have it, not only pay for itself, but be profitable.
I never heard that story from you. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, so I guess what was how did you know what to make?
I was just really good at making jewelry. And I think like flame working, so that's like Venetian is like the history of that. And so a lot of bead making was Venetian. And
Mhm,
that was the style that they teach you in the first class, right? You're going to use millefiori and you're going to be typically doing stuff around metal rods that you can pull off and turn into a bead. That's kind of like an easy entry way to start in glass blowing. So the first things that I made were like beads.
mhm.
And, my wife would always like when I made something for her that looked pretty and she would wear it. And so that was just kind of like, hey, I'll just continue. I got really good at it, where I wasn't doing it on rods anymore. I was doing it free form. I could make the bales myself. And I got to a point where I was pretty good and I could do these things in like 15 minutes. I could make a wearable piece in 15 minutes. So like 4 per hour. And then the aha moment was when, I had a lilac festival event. We used to do these little circuits when I was still in college to sell the goods. And I
Mhm.
was selling them at probably like an average of $100 a piece. And so
Wow.
that in my mind at that point is like, I'm making $400 an hour doing this, where I go to work my other job and they want to pay me what, like, $15, $20 an hour. I'm like, why wouldn't I invest more time in this skill, um, to increase my rates? And then, if you figure how that transitioned into real estate, it was pretty simple. It's like the same concept, right? It's like, what is my time? What can I make my time worth?
Mhm,
And I didn't find any other avenue other than real estate that had as big of a dollar per hour possibility.
mhm. So how did you figure out besides the Lilac Festival? So you were a Lilac Festival vendor then?
I was, yeah. I did
Wow.
Lilac, I did Clothesline, I did Park Ave. Those are my three events, my three main events.
So did you have long hair at that time?
I've had long hair since I was like 15.
No way. Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Because I was like, yeah, dude with long hair and selling like jewelry and that sort of thing. That definitely fits. I was wondering if you would ever like had like rocked like this like the spiky hair type of type of look into your adulthood.
Not in my adulthood, no. I had my last bad spiky haircut when I was like 14, and I was like, you know what? I'm done with haircuts. I'm just gonna let this stuff grow.
So what other distribution channels did you have the festivals, or was that kind of it?
That was the main distribution. I tried to do a little bit of marketing, but it was like early. That was a long time ago. That must have been
Mhm.
like early 2000s. So the internet wasn't quite what it is today as far as being able to do commerce and stuff. But I
Yeah,
still have
there.
the domain name that I registered, Molten Fusion. I was quite proud of finding that and registering it.
Well, you've always been good at like coming up with cool names for stuff. Like, God, what was it? Southwedge Redux was
Hmm.
was one of your names. I actually, before I met you, I read an article about you and that name. I was like, damn, that's like a really cool name. So,
Nice.
so yeah, my first ever dollar as a kid, as a like a kidpreneur was 4 o'clock seeds. I don't know if you've ever seen 4 o'clocks before.
Mm-mm.
They look awful. I mean, to be honest with you, they're like that's the reason why nobody has them. But they have a lot of ground cover and they produce a ton of seeds. And so I was wanting to buy Star Wars action figures because I had this idea as a kid that I was going to have a Star Wars store, like
Nice.
decades into the future,
Hmm.
and that I would hire my dad as like the shopkeeper for it because I would go to my grandmother was a vendor at the Avon flea market, and I would go to the Avon flea market and hang out with her because she watched me a lot when I was a kid. So I'd go to the because my parents were always working, and so I'd go to the Avon flea market, walk around, and there was these guys selling like an Obi-Wan Kenobi in the package for like $50,
Right.
and and you would see the little sticker that was on there from like Woolworths as to what that thing cost originally, and it was like was like 75 cents or something like
Right.
that. Right. And so I was like, well, if I can buy these like Power of the Force Star Wars things for $5 and extrapolate that out into like 20, 30 years in the future, then I would be a total baller. Right. So anyways, I couldn't get the seed capital from my dad to buy my Star Wars figurines. So he was like, "Hey, Matt, these seeds are all over the place in the backyard and on the side, the sidewalk and the patio. Like, pick them up, put them in, 25 of them into little like plastic baggies, and then go to door through the neighborhood and like sell them for 25 cents a piece, right?" And so I think that people bought these things out of more like sympathy rather than like they actually wanted them. But I used to live on a street called Littlebrook Drive, which was off of 31 in the Parrington, Pittsford area. So if you drive through that neighborhood, or if you live in that neighborhood and you have a ton of these flowers that like are ugly and they're like, oh God, I just wish these things would go away. That was probably my doing.
Whoops. Yeah. I've got my son into gardening, and he's turned it into a little bit of an entrepreneurial activity. He really likes hot sauce. That's something that we share together. As I get older, I can't do as hot as I used to, but I still do enjoy some hot sauces. So we made a fermented hot sauce a couple years ago. It came out really well. And then since then, each year we've increased our production, where our last year, we actually had my parents bring up a couple bushels of peppers from Pennsylvania from a local farmer.
Oh, yeah.
And we made over 100 bottles of hot sauce together.
Wow.
And by together, I'd say it's probably still, 80% dad, 20% Luke. But if we continue to do this, it needs to shift where it's 20% dad, 80% Luke. But he hasn't monetized any of them yet. He still owes me for the bottles. That was a capital loan for him to get that off the ground. But he's got enough bottles that we'll be able to bottle for a couple years without running out of bottles. And I think he'll do well selling them this spring. He's looking into getting like a little stand over at the farmer's market or something, although he thinks he might not be allowed to because we didn't do it in a commercial kitchen. I think I like accidentally planted that seed in his head like a year ago, and now he's like, "Oh, we can't do it. It's not legal."
Oh, you know what? I challenge that. You can sell it directly to consumer, like let's say at farmers markets. But if you're going to sell it like wholesaler to a retailer, then it has to be in a commercial kitchen and that sort of thing.
Oh, perfect.
And because it's plant based, it's not, and it's just has to be a commercial kitchen, not something that is. I used to work for a sausage maker, Hartman's Old World Sausage. Shout out to Joseph Bruner, who bought that from little Miss Hartman. And that was a meat facility. So we had to have production overseen by an inspector from the USDA. But no, if you're selling directly to the consumer, then you don't need to do that. So
That's awesome.
I just took that excuse away from Luke.
What about online sales? You can do online sales too?
I don't know about that. Possibly you could, because if it's direct to consumer and you're not going through a retailer, the reason why there's the commercial kitchen things there is that when you talk about retail distribution out to like a broad mass of people, the government or its agencies, I don't know if it's the FDA or USDA or whatever, wants to be able to track that. Because that can, if you're selling 1 million bottles of something and it's got like some, nasty, like fatal bacteria in it or something like that, then you can kill a lot of people, right? But how many people could you possibly kill with a bad batch of hot sauce, like selling at a farmer's market, for instance?
Right.
And it's sort of like that buyer beware, caveat emptor. So, but I think, maybe you could, you could sell stuff on like Shopify or Etsy or something like that. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing the avenues that are available now for people to develop a proof of concept for a side hustle. This guy that I still follow, Paul Singh, who's a founder of Results Junkies. He's like he's in the venture capital space. He came to Rochester, and the one of the things he said with me that really stuck was, if you can develop a side hustle where you can generate $1,000 a month consistently, then you have a concept that can probably be turned into a multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the thing is that with Shopify and Etsy and all these other, you can have a pretty professional looking store and distribution methods for those, and not really put a lot of capital up at risk.
Right.
And
Operate out of your garage.
Exactly. So I can't even imagine what's going to be available. I mean, my daughter's 3.5 years older now. I can't even imagine what's going to be available for for what she could do to exercise and develop that entrepreneurial muscle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. My son is, he's had a lot of different YouTube channels. He'll go in phases. He's interested in something, he'll start a YouTube channel. And right now he's doing, I think, this game called like Gorilla Canyons or something like that.
Okay.
It's on the Oculus, and apparently it's a real popular game. He's posting content and getting like 10,000 views in like a couple hours. It's insanity. I'm like, I need to hire him for my marketing. Or I need to talk about Gorilla Canyons. I'm not sure.
Yeah. That's the one thing that I was at the airport. We had oh my God, dude, it was eight flights in a couple of weeks, going from Rochester to Denver, and then from Denver to Florida back to Rochester. And there was these people in the airport that were watching YouTube videos of other people playing video games.
Yeah.
And this was like grown adults too, which was kind of weird. I'm a former video game fanatic, but I just don't even have the time anymore.
Right.
But yeah, no, there's this whole thing on Twitch where that people just like to watch other people play video games. I'm just like, why don't you just play them yourself? So.
Yeah. Well, if you rewind to our childhood, I remember a lot of times just watching, whoever had this PlayStation or whatever it was at the time, they would be so good at it that you would never get to play. You would just have to sit there and watch until they died. It could be hours. But yeah, for me, that was torture. That was not pleasure. It's like, come on, give me the controller.
No, absolutely. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this banter with Mark and I today. Sometimes you just have to pivot. And this is the challenge of running a show with that's live with guests. I've been on podcasts. I've been on podcasts before that. That they're recorded in advance. They're not streamed live. So, it's kind of no big deal if you have to reschedule, which I never do. So if you need somebody to talk about entrepreneurism or real estate, I'm happy to be on your show if you're tuning into this. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, but we'll get him back on here. Maybe I'll invite him to come in person. That way we know we've got him pinned down and he can't be at an airport or something.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, also a shout out to, speaking of young entrepreneurs, shout out to Cam from Real 3D. He was actually Cam Vankerhoeve. He's a photographer, a real estate photographer that I met several years ago. He started out as a real estate agent because he wanted to grow a real estate investment portfolio. Hated real estate sales, bought some pretty expensive camera equipment and started to teach himself how to do real estate photography to do his own listings. And other real estate agents started to hire him. And I started talking to him early on about, it's like, hey, why don't you, this is photography. You're great at photography. Videography is the new future, right? So, he started doing videography and that sort of thing. And now he just recently, within the past several months, started doing social media.
Nice.
Creative agency for starting with real estate agents. So he has a podcast studio, an in-person podcast studio. So if we get Jeff in, I know we have a place to film something in person if we want to capture something. So
yeah, that sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for tuning into this week's episode, and we will see you next Thursday at 2:00.
All right, peace.